Good afternoon. I'm your host, Timothy, also known as the Timeless Time Traveler. Today, I decided to travel back in time in order to solve the famous mystery. How did the Catholic Church get to now? I'm going to be interviewing 5 different historical figures and getting their thoughts on the era which they lived in. From all the way back to 66 AD from the early church, I will first be asking Josephus, a Jewish priest and historian, on his take on how the church got to now. Here I am in Jerusalem with the respectable Josephus. So tell me, what have you contributed to society, and how have your works influenced history?
Well, I've always enjoyed reading and writing, so I decided to express my passion by writing many works on the Jewish revolt of 66 to 70 and on earlier Jewish history. It has come to my attention that these works are very valuable in our day and age. Some of these books include The History of the Jewish War, The Antiquities of the Jews, and Against Apion. Almost all of what you know from this era concerning the Jews come from my writing.
What a great contribution you have made. I was also wondering, what event furthered Jesus' message during your time?
Well, certainly a big event during this era was the Council of Jamnia, which finalized the creation of the canonical Holy Bible. This was a big deal because the Bible would go on to spread across the world and is the most popular book in history.
Of course, the Bible. Easily one of the most, if not the most influential books ever compiled. Now, what would you say hindered Jesus' message the most during your time?
Well, it was very dangerous to be a Christian at this time for a number of reasons. Firstly, there were problems with identity between Palestinians and Hellenistic Jews, who were the initial converts. These groups did not get along and had their own ideas for how Christianity should be. This led to disagreements and violent revolts. On top of all of this, the Roman leader now began to persecute Christians. Thousands of Christians were tortured, imprisoned, and killed, and this really slowed down the growth of Jesus' message.
Thank you for your valuable time and starting us on our journey to how the church got to now. Next up, we will travel all the way to 360 AD to converse with St. Jerome from the era of acceptance and liberty. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to answer a few questions.
No problem at all.
To begin, could you tell me a little bit about your contributions towards humanity and how your actions might have improved education, arts, or perhaps even politics?
Well, I think it's safe to say that my influence has been far-reaching and profound, especially in the early Middle Ages. As a biblical translator, priest, theologian, and historian, I wrote many works which profoundly influenced and contributed to humanity. I was known for my teachings on Christian moral life, especially to those being in cosmopolitan centers such as Rome. My passion for Scripture also allowed me to express myself and my beliefs, bringing others to Christianity. For example, when I wrote Concerning Illustrious Men, in order to counter pagan pride and pagan culture. In about 389, I established a monastery in Bethlehem where hermits could live, educate, and practice their faith.
You've certainly done a lot in your lifetime, and I'd like to thank you for all your contributions. When you look back on your era of church history, is there a single event that stands out to you, which you think personally advanced the message of Jesus the most?
Well, I don't want to come across as self-centered or anything. However, I strongly believe that my Latin translation of the Bible, which became known as the Vulgate, absolutely was the biggest event that helped spread the Christian faith. This was a remarkable effort considering the slender instruments at my disposal. However, it was still well worth it. As the Vulgate became one of the most influential texts in Western European society, for most Western Christians, it was the only version of the Bible ever encountered, and it had incredible influence throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period. Aside from its use in prayer, liturgy, and private study, the Vulgate also served as inspiration for art and architecture, hymns, countless paintings, and popular mystery plays. Without it, Jesus' message would definitely not have spread as far as it did.
Well, I would certainly have to agree with you on that one. That is truly unbelievable. Your hard work in translating definitely made the Bible more accessible, and you should be very proud of it. So, we talked about the advancements in the message of Jesus. Now, could you tell me what event in your era was most contrary to the message of Christ?
The rise of Pelagianism was monumental in my time, so I decided to write a dialogue against the Pelagians. They believed that original sin did not taint human nature and that mortal will is capable of choosing good or evil without special divine aid. As a result of my writings against Pelagianism, a body of excited Parthians broke into the monastic buildings, set them on fire, attacked the inmates, and killed the deacon, forcing me to seek safely in a neighboring fortress. Their message of violence was full of hatred, and it was definitely contrary to Jesus' message.
Alright, well, those are all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much, St. Jerome, for your time, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you. Next up, we have Pope Urban II. Hello, Your Holiness. It's an honor to meet you. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions.
Yes, of course.
So tell me, how have the humanities advanced because of your work? And what event during your time most advanced Christianity?
Well, for me, those two appear to be linked, all because of what I accomplished. I was the first pope to rally the Christians to go on a crusade to take back the Holy Land. I gave a great sermon at the Council of Clermont in 1095, which explained in depth all of the reasons why a crusade was absolutely necessary and all of the wondrous benefits that it could all bring. I offered indulgences to any who fought and died on this journey, and the First Crusade was a huge success. We were able to set up many settlements in the Holy Land and fairly divide the conquered land.
Outstanding work, Your Holiness. I see you are a large political figure who was not afraid to use your power. Could I ask you what most opposed Jesus' message during your time as Pope?
In 1014, the Byzantine Emperor Basil II routed the Bulgarians at the Battle of Simbalagu. Basil killed most of the Bulgarian army and then blinded 24,000 Bulgarian captives. This is my obvious choice because it spread the message of violence, completely contrary to what Jesus' message was. Especially when Basil blinded the Bulgarians, that is brutality at its finest.
It sure is. Well, thank you for your detailed answer. One last question. Do you have any regrets or things that you would have done differently?
Well, my first crusade that I sanctioned was a complete success, but my successors, like Pope Eugene III and others, could not successfully reclaim the Holy Land when it was lost again. I somewhat blame myself for this, because I was the first person to start a crusade, but I really expected other popes to succeed if they were to try and replicate what I did. Nevertheless, most crusades afterwards failed terribly, and it is quite shameful.
You're right. You created the most successful crusade. Thank you so much for your time, Your Holiness, but I'm afraid that I must go now.
It was a pleasure.
Next up, we have John Huss, leader of the Hussites in Prague from the Fracture and Healing era. Hello, John. Do you have a second to answer a few questions?
Certainly. What can I do for you?
Firstly, I was wondering what contributions you have made to advance education, healthcare, arts, or politics.
Well, my works were mostly political, as I was seen as the first church reformer when I lived in a time before people like Luther or Calvin. I influenced many people living in Western Europe at the time, and my teachings would also go on to influence people like Martin Luther after I passed away. Also, my followers were known as the Hussites, and they would continue to spread and preach my messages well into the 15th and 16th century. I denounced the moral teachings of the clergy and pinpointed imperfections in the church, and I was eventually caught and burned at the stake for doing this.
Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that. Well, thank you so much for your contributions. I'm sure many people sincerely appreciate it. Now, could you tell me what event of your era in church history do you think greatly increased the spread of Jesus' message?
Well, many of my ideas came from John Wycliffe, who attacked the privileged status of the clergy. Personally, I believe that he was responsible for the spreading the message of Christ, as he stated that scriptures are the best reliable guide to the truth about God. Sometimes, popes and clerics in our time could be corrupt, and what they might have said could have been false. Therefore, by educating the people about the Bible and scriptures, they could see Jesus' message much more clearly.
Now, what would you say is the biggest event which prevented Jesus' messages from spreading?
Well, this would definitely have to be all of the simonies that occurred during this time and the Western Schism. Church officials at this point in time would claim that they had power to give and sell indulgences, and quickly took people's money in exchange for these fake blessings. People's trust in the church greatly declined due to the illegal selling of these blessings and other fake church relics. Also, the Western Schism was an event where multiple people claimed to be the Pope. The situation escalated and caused mass panic from Christians all across Europe. By the time all of the problems had been solved, there was already too much damage to the church, which would take years to reverse.
Thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure getting to know you. Now let's move on to Rome, Italy to interview the famous Pope Gregory. Now I have the honor of speaking to Pope Gregory XVI. Great being with you today. I would just like to ask you a few questions if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer a few questions.
Well, there is no doubt that from the year you were born, in 1765, to now, humanity has evolved. Can you just elaborate on how exactly humanity has improved thanks to you?
I wrote a book almost 50 years ago called Il Trionfo del Santa Sede, which means the triumph of the Holy See. It talks about upholding papal infallibility and the right of the Pope to the temporal power. That book, by now, is very popular and has been translated into 7 different languages. My book helps people see a different way that popes can use papacy. It helps humanity because I made knowledge accessible to everyone. Not only do people know more about how the popes work and all that, but now people have the opportunity to make improvements in how the system works.
Very well said. I might have to give that book a quick read. Anyway, I've been told that you are one of the most educated popes ever. How has that helped you improve humanity?
Well, because of my vast education, I have interest in art, learning, evangelism. These interests allow me to make advances during my reign. I founded the Etruscan and Egyptian museums at the Vatican, and the Christian Museum at the Lateran. I also had ideas that could help people in the future, such as when I established the steamboat transport at Ostia in Rome. This can drastically change what the future holds. I think my biggest contribution was the fact that I founded public baths, hospitals, and orphanage. I sent missionaries to Abyssinia as well. These, I found, changed how humanity lived as a whole.
That's quite a big list. It looks like you have lived a very full life. I would like to ask another question. What single event of your era in church history do you personally think most advanced the message of Jesus?
I think that my contribution to founding public baths, hospitals, and orphanages advanced Jesus' message the most in my era. By me doing this, I was able to send a message to the world that everyone deserves to be taken care of and that everyone is equal. Jesus' message exactly. Previously where I lived, there was a lot of people who did not have access to washrooms, hospitals, and even just care overall. Kids would often be left alone to die if there was nobody to tend to them, and the sick often would die without hope of even living. However, with that being said, the rich would still have access to hospitals. I think that without me, the world would still be like this. I feel like that because of what I did, we have come closer to the truth that everyone is equal.
Wow, very well said. Thank you for that very thorough answer. Last question. What single event of your era in church history do you personally think was the most contrary to the message of Jesus?
French Revolution, easy. That event was just horrible. So much violence. I think it's safe to say that Jesus' message had no violence at all. Jesus always said, turn the other cheek, love thy neighbor, and of course, do not kill. The French Revolution is exactly the opposite. The lower class was mistreated, and because the upper class thought not everyone was equal, that led to the lower class fighting back.
Thank you for answering that one with so much passion. It has been an honor talking to you today, but I'm afraid that I must leave now. Goodbye, friend. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen, a tour back in time on how the church got to now. I hope you will join me next week for our journey all about Judaism. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a good night, everybody.